So we finished that hour of prayer, and we had a clarion call. 40 days of prayer and fasting, 40 days of vigil, 40 days of outreach, and we were scared. I did not want to do this. I didn't think we could do this. But when we realized children were going to die that next week, women were going to be wounded that next week, if we failed to act, we said, we have to do this. And so we decided to kick off that first 40 Days for Life campaign. But not before I made one phone call. To call my buddy, David Araby, and blame him for what he had just gotten us into. So I called David and I said, hey David, you know that crazy idea you shared last night? He said, yeah. I said, we're going to do it. He's like, oh, that's awesome. I said, for 40 days, we're going to do that. And then I wanted to see if he was committed. I said, okay, David, when can I sign you up for it? He said, well, let's see, I just got married, I'm going to school, I have a part-time job, I can't do much during the day. How about 11 p.m. to 7 a.m.? I said, wow, that's great. Which day? He said, all of them. I said, wait, no, we're talking 40 days. That's 8 hours. 40 times 8, that's a big number. He said, yeah, I'll be there. And he was, with passion, with intensity. And he was a Knight of Columbus, so he got all his brother Knights, and they came out together and they called it the Night Shift, with a K at the beginning of it. And those guys were out there sometimes, 15 or 20 of them in the middle of the night. It was a beautiful sight to see. But David, with his passion and intensity, helped us to kick off that first 40 Days for Life. Over 1,000 people got involved, and abortions were reduced in that town by the end by 28%. Over 100%. So we finished that campaign exhausted, never wanting to do this again, thinking nobody else would be crazy enough to do this. But one by one, other cities and towns began to replicate 40 days of prayer and fasting, 40 days of vigil, 40 days of outreach. It spread to numerous places. Even rumor is it spread to Aurora, Illinois. I don't know if Eric Scheidler, is he in the room somewhere? He might know something about that. But it continued to spread, and everywhere where it spread, people were getting involved. Lives were being saved. Hearts and minds were being changed. And so by 2007, we finally said, why don't we join God in what he's doing and organize a national 40 Days for Life? And still, our thinking was so small, we thought maybe a dozen cities would do this. In that first campaign, 89 cities and 33 states participated. And since then, you heard the numbers that Pat shared. It has spread literally around the world. 40 Days for Life just finished up in Croatia. It just finished up in Ghana, Nigeria, just finished up in Rio de Janeiro. It just finished up in Canada, just finished up all across the United States. People were praying and fasting, and lives were being saved as a result. There have been thousands of lives saved. As Pat mentioned, over 100 workers have had a change of heart and left the abortion industry, and now 59 abortion facilities have closed their doors and gone out of business for good. But there's one thing you need to know. The story I shared about David Araby, I thought the whole story was him getting it started. What I didn't know is there was more to the story. After our first national 40 Days for Life, I got an email from David. I had moved to Virginia by this point from Texas. David had moved elsewhere and started a business. I hadn't seen him in years. And he said, hey, I was just reading about these 89 cities that just did the 40 Days for Life. How cool is that? Who would have thought some rednecks in Texas could start something that could spread around the country? He said, you may have wondered why I shared that crazy idea with you. You may have wondered why I was out there 8 hours a night and brought those other guys with me. And he said, I never told you before, but you need to know the rest of the story. A few nights before that dinner at your house, I got a call that my dad was dying of cancer. And I was told, if you want to see him, this is your last chance. He said, so I went, and I was the only family member who could go. I arrived at the hospital, and I walked in, and my dad sat up and had tears in his eyes. He said, David, thank you for coming. It means the world to me. He said, David, will you pray with me for an end to abortion? David said, okay, Dad. In the back of his head, he's thinking, I cuss like a sailor, I party all the time, I'm not religious, whatever, you're dying, I'll pray with you. Seriously. So he prayed with him. The next day he came back, his dad said, hey, will you pray with me for an end to abortion? Okay. And the next day, and the next day. He walked in one day and his dad was clearly at the end of the road. He was barely alive, and through his strained lips he said, David, will you pray with me for an end to abortion? David had it at this point. He said, Dad, can we do anything else? Why don't we pray for your healing? Or why don't we pray for an ease of your pain? Anything else? His dad sat up in the bed and he said, no, we are going to pray for an end to abortion. And then he told David why. He said, David, years ago when I was a young man, I got a girl pregnant out of wedlock. It was going to be a scandal, and my family was going to be upset. Her family was going to be upset. So I pressured her until she agreed to set an appointment for an abortion. He said, I went down early that morning by myself, and I went in and prepaid in cash so she couldn't back out of the abortion. And then I went outside and waited for her. He said, David, that woman stood me up that morning. I tried to call her. She wouldn't return my calls. I tried to reach her through family members. Couldn't reach her. Days went by. Weeks went by. Eventually, my family and her family found out she was pregnant, and they shamed us into getting married. He said, David, that woman I was so angry at that morning was your mother. And that child I just wanted to abort to cover up my own sin and get rid of, that was you, David. He said, little did I know on that morning that the one person I just wanted to get rid of would be the only person standing here by my side as I lay here dying. He said, David, will you pray with me for an end to abortion? And they did. David's father went home to be with the Lord shortly thereafter. But David Araby was forever changed.